It's going to be a very busy class, so I'm going to try to really stay to time. So welcome everybody to today's class, which is on sustainable fashion, which is a subject that it's not only about trends, but about choices and impacts that we navigate in everyday lives. When I was growing up, my family would travel to the United States a couple times a year, and my grandparents would take me to Brooks Brothers, and they would buy me 2-3 shirts, 2 pants, and 1 jacket. And clothing was expensive, and it really was meant to last till it was worn out. Recently, I went to Uniqlo and bought several shirts and hoodies, and I'm only going to wear them a few times and then get new ones. So yes, I am very ready to learn from today's lecture. I am thrilled to have 3 distinguished speakers, each bringing a wealth of experience to pivotal areas within the fashion industry. They're going to guide us through discussions on navigating the world of fashion and fast fashion with an eye towards sustainable choices, exploring the cutting edge of innovation in sustainable fashion, and leveraging the power of social media as a transformative tool for sustainability. Their expertise will offer us unique insights into creating a future where style meets sustainability. So now let's just dive into an engaging and enlightening discussion on transforming one of the world's most dynamic and challenging sectors towards a greener and more equitable future. We have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Amanda Parks, a visionary in the realm of sustainable fashion innovation. With a doctorate from MIT's Media Lab and foundational studies at Stanford, she has been at the forefront of merging cutting-edge technology with environmentally conscious fashion practices. As Chief Innovation Officer of Pangaea, listed among the most innovative brands by Fast Company, Dr. Parks advances sustainable fashion and lifestyle products. Her experience extends to academia, teaching sustainable textile ecologies at Harvard and lecturing on biomaterials at Columbia University. Dr. Parks' profound impact on the industry has garnered international acclaim, including prestigious design awards and features at top forums like TED and the New York Times International Luxury Conference, solidifying her place as a significant force in shaping the fashion industry's future. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Amanda Parks, an innovator dedicated to crafting sustainable solutions within fashion and beyond. Amanda, thank you. Please,
hello, everybody.
You can share.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here, and nice to meet you all. Gosh, there are almost 400 of you. It's quite amazing. Let me just start my slideshow, and we'll get underway. Lots to say here. So thank you for the intro, and really happy to be here. Always happy to share with students across the globe. Even though I work mostly in the industry now, I'm super engaged in kind of what the future of inspiring students across the globe, and I think it's really important, and this is such an emerging area. I call myself a fashion scientist, which is absolutely a new discipline that I may have made up, but the point being that I know that textiles and fashion are a deeply technical industry and scientific, although, there's been a sort of strange historical bias towards them being separated as craft and sort of women's work in some gendered ways. And really it's about reclaiming the technical aspects of all areas of textiles and fashion to the main disciplines of engineering and science. So that's where I'm coming from. And just a little bit on my background, as you mentioned, I did undergrad at Stanford in mechanical engineering, product design. I was at the D School, also did art history, and then worked in museum exhibition design across the world, and went back I was at the Exploratorium, locally to you guys for a while. That was my first real job, designing exhibits there, and really that garnered a passion for informal science education and how empowering that part of it was. Like, understanding our world is just a huge part of empowering public discourse. And then went back to MIT and got a PhD that was hybrid material science, computer science, and I was looking at a lot of systems design. How do we integrate, digital technology and innovation into the material and biological world? What kind of influence and augmentation can we be looking at? And this was, 2003, I was starting this work, and we had just decoded the human genome. It was early stages of synthetic biology, really, really cool time to be looking at digital tech in the light of biology. After this is some of my past work across fashion, doing everything from crazy 3D printing. I did a lot of work in wearable tech, projects that were all about sensing bodily systems. I worked on pet wearables, fashion wearables, designed the costumes for a Parisian ballet, where all of the energy for the lights and sound of the show was collected from the dancers' movements through the costumes themselves. So all this wide range, inside of what we consider the realm of fashion, but I really came into the main industry through the back door. And that was an interesting way to come in, like very much with a technologist point of view. This was some of my work from MIT, modular robotic systems, sensor networks, this back end of building a lot of circuitry and understanding the physical world around it. And also built a lot of e-waste and, paying for that now. I say that I'm not going to finish my career before I've built a fully biodegradable circuit to make up for my sins. And this is part of the process of moving towards a new material future where we can do a lot of like amazing things with the new technologies of material science and biology that we're sitting on. My first company out of MIT was a microalgae photobioreactor company. And this was based on an innovation of sort of an electronic kind of digital innovation that was looking at optimizing photosynthesis based on some work from early in the 70s on energy, the National Renewable Energy Lab, applying new digital innovation to those sort of principles, and ran this as a company for a while, and then sold it, licensed it, and then moved back into fashion, as I love. They're more related than you think in terms of building biofeedback algorithms for the two systems, for a lot of different bioreactor systems, which I'll get into with biofabrication. But fundamentally, this has always been me, equally comfortable in, fixing my blue mechanical car as a kid, also fashionista with, pink hot pants. And I'm here to say that even as sort of a middle-aged person, you can be this person. No one told me that you couldn't, even though we were definitely living in a different time then. But happily, this is much more doing science and fashion together is now a thing. Very, happy to report. So the company that I helped found, I was one of the founders of way back in 2019, it's called Pangaea. And we are, mostly known externally as a fashion brand, but we also have a deep piece of R&D behind us and our founding principles. So we operate at the intersection of science, purpose, and design. And we like to say that we're kind of a global collective. We're not sort of into the cult of the founder. We like to think that all the influences, working across creativity and across a lot of different innovators. We do our own research. We also collaborate, and we're really here to think about, what is the future of the sort of getting innovative tech into everyday products. Oops. I'm not sure why we can't move ahead here. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this, you might know us if you've seen our stuff. We're headquartered in the UK. I'm based in New York, but we're much better known in Europe. But you might have seen our sort of brightly colored tracksuits that went quite viral during the pandemic because they were sustainable work from home gear. We know that we owe a lot of the work that I've been able to do personally from our global success. We went, up to 76 million in revenue in our first 16 months, which was relatively unheard of. But we had things like this happening, which, this brought down our website. We've got Harry Styles, Justin Bieber, dressed out in our pinks. And this, it's interesting because one of the choices you can make in terms of sustainability, one of the things I like to say is that the best sustainable product is one that you don't even know is sustainable, that you're just buying because it's cool and because you like it and it's high quality. And this is where, this is what we're on a mission to actually change the narrative around, sustainable fashion isn't about horrible hemp or these dated notions, but you can be a popular fashion choice and still be within the sustainable realm and be using your profits for good to be putting back into research. So I'm going to show you a quick video on our brand and our ethos. It's just like about a minute.
To those who care, what if we could turn flowers into coats, air into ink, grapes into leather? Let us introduce you to the greatest inventor of all time, nature. And us humans as its best creative partners. Because our actions now will define life on Earth for the next 100 years. This is why we innovate. For a planet where both humans and nature thrive.
So we're a fashion brand that doesn't really, in our brand video, we don't actually have any fashion in it, which is kind of the point, that we're actually looking at this as an innovation, established platform. And the way that I'd like to think of it is that we're trying to move our relationship with nature back into a rebalance. We come from, historically, the age of wonder, where we were in awe of nature. Then we were able to kind of understand it more in a way that was like sort of known as what I call the age of reason. Then the age of industry, where, the Industrial Revolution, we start exploiting nature and kind of working up against it. And we're now kind of in a recircling on, okay, we know that this isn't going to work. We're exploiting it, and we need to move back into how we can become in balance and use all of our unbelievable science that has emerged, especially in the last sort of 30 years, to actually bring that back into balance. So what I've developed for our brand is a philosophy which I call high-tech naturalism, where we look at the world from a place of abundance. And we say, what are the resources that we have out there? Where's the world sitting right now? What are the things that we can use responsibly? And then have the highest forms of science and technology augment what we can do with those things. So functionality of materials is just one example of this, but it's that technology works in support of sustainability. And this is a really important shift because, I went to engineering school at a time when it was really, not necessarily, it was thinking about how much can you do? What's the function? What's the absolute maximum performance functionality, and not having this sort of, not a lot of consideration around what these systems or these new materials were doing to the earth. And I think, so I want to think about that as a huge shift. I know at Harvard, we have a whole new sustainable institute, a climate institute, which is actually looking at the entirety of the curriculum through this lens to try to think about this as a kind of, this is the future of education. This is also, I'm addressing in my little talk all about new materials, because this is the area that I work in that I'm most passionate about. But I understand that in order to change the entire fashion industry, we have multiple things. I'm not, I'm promoting new materials because we will make new things, but we also have to think about business models and experiential and behavioral changes. You just mentioned, how we used to consume clothes, and I'm totally pro everything about, resale, recycling, things like, I'm a passionate user of Rent the Runway, the sharing economy, vintage, and then sort of thinking about fashion as an experience and not just about consumption. And there's so many amazing platforms out there that are kind of being enabled, and especially for your generation. So that's a whole other, multiple other lectures, but just to point out, that's a huge part of this entire industry change that we are also pro. I just happen to be a scientist. Something that really changed my mindset, people ask me all the time, how can you have a fashion brand, make things when you're thinking about a sustainable future? Isn't it just make nothing? And the point is that this is an economist who really, really changed my way of thinking. And this is the way that I can kind of understand economics, in the sense that it's not about continuous growth, right? So this is a theory called donut economics. Kate Raworth is the scientist, and she's defined kind of this space in the middle of the donut, the safe and just space for humanity, where we're protected by a social foundation, and then we live below an ecological ceiling. So we're not taking too much, we're not exploiting our natural resources, but while we're also protecting all living things and all of our resources. So I encourage you to look into this. It's an incredible book, and there's lots of visuals in it. It's really understandable, and it really brings to light how we can actually grow and build things inside this safe space. Inside the donut, we can have innovation, we can have creativity, and this is an important way for us to think about living within our means and within our ecological means. So inside of Pangaea, we have what we call responsible innovation pillars. This guides our business. And I know this isn't a business course, but just this is quite rare to have a business that is a for-profit business. We're a B Corp, so we also have sustainable goals, but to really be driven by this from the ground up. We were started by, inside of the space of committing to these goals right away, and not making product that was outside of these. So we have both what we do with our research. We're very committed to biodiversity and ridding the industry of fossil fuels that are probably the biggest ones that we go after. And then everything else around toxins and using animal products responsibly, not 100% vegan. That's another question. And then, of course, waste reduction. And then also looking at the impact pillars, which is on the flip side of analysis. What are we looking for in terms of climate action and circularity and giving back? And of course, the realm of protecting humans and everything social that goes along with the fashion industry, which I'm sure you've been hearing about. The innovation spectrum inside of our company, we have different projects and research that is everything from things that are happening now. So this gradual process of improving what we already have. So moving from traditional cotton into organic and then into regenerative. These are really important systems of things that are, systems that are already in place. And then into kind of revolutionary systems, which are new big improvements, a new material, and then all the way into disruptive systems, things that I talk about with biofabrication, where it's an entirely new infrastructure that needs investment and redevelopment and is further out. But it's important that we're investing and working in all three of these realms and on a continuum, so that we have changes happening, as we move through. We also have a B2B part of our business where we sell our textiles and our innovations. We do licensing and also, material agreements with other brands, which is very surprising inside the fashion industry. This is about that it's like non-exclusivity, which is most of the fashion brands looking for exclusivity. This is something that I brought from tech. Companies like Google and Apple, they are owning the means of their own production. They are inventing the next generation of the industry. It's like the Intel Inside model. You can create the chip for everybody else to use. That's a part of your bottom line. And we are creating materials that are better. We want to share them with people and brands having different aesthetics and different focuses. So that's an important part of our business model as well. We have a portfolio of new trademarks and technologies that are our own that we've developed, and I'll go through some of these on further slides. And then we also we're become expertise in doing collaborations and working with existing startups and companies that are very much in the technical and scientific realm, and we're bringing them into commercialization through fashion and lifestyle products. So the material spaces to watch. This is what I kind of want to point out is these are the things that I'm most paying attention to and working through. Waste valorization, carbon capture, biofabrication, and programmable physical chemistry. And let me dig into these. So first, agricultural waste. This is at the forefront. There are so many different products and plants out there that are being grown either for agriculture, for food, that there's parts of them that can be used for incredible fibers, or that are just generally like weeds out there that we can harvest responsibly. So one example of this, we have our plant and fruit fiber, which it's a mixture of, we have a kind of a grid of different fiber types that we've analyzed and blended, everything from banana waste, pineapple waste, Himalayan nettle, different forms of bamboo, eucalyptus, and seaweed. And this is a huge new category to show we can make beautiful kind of lush drapey jerseys that involve no cotton. Now, there's nothing wrong with cotton. It's an amazing fiber, but we've over-industrialized it. And what we're saying is spread the biodiversity out. Where is the things that we have in abundance? I just got back from, I was with the government of Panama looking at their banana trade. Can we collect their waste and turn it into not just an incredible fiber, but a source of income in a place where there's maybe not necessarily as many things. So it's about, we call side streaming, and you're doubling your value through a crop. Himalayan nettle, we have an incredible partnership with a women's collective in the Himalayas where they collect this nettle in a place where it grows very specifically as weed, as waste, collected in a responsible amount. We are turning this into products for our denim. It's so strong. It's an incredible fiber. The innovation came where we had to adjust the machines to the strength of the fiber. So there was an engineering back piece on it. We worked with someone who was high up in Levi's to do this. And now it's such an amazing denim resource that is 100% weed, basically. Also, one of our first products was seaweed. This is an incredible fiber as well. You turn it into a fiber through mixing it through different processes. It's sort of a powdered lyocell, but it grows abundantly, and also it grows in waste. And I have a new research project with Invest Puerto Rico working on collecting all the waste orgasm that is, taking over the Caribbean beaches and spreading into Southeast Asia, et cetera. So this is a part of climate change. So we're saying, okay, look, if this is happening, what can we do to turn this into a resource? It can be turned into bioplastic, cellulose, lipids, feedstocks. This is just really if you switch the narrative and say, okay, we don't like that this is happening, we have to stop climate change, but if this is here, this is a resource we should use. And this is a great project which will be presenting in Puerto Rico to the governor there to set up, its iconic system of building a mini, like a mini facility, production facility in a container ship on the beach. So this can be taken around to other islands and other places where they need a kind of local production. Like I said, there's so many things you can use seaweed for across many things. This is about side streaming, one ingredient into many different industries. Flour down is another example. This was our first patented release and our biggest scaled up product. This is an alternative to animal down that also has no synthetics. So it's entirely plant and bio-based. It's a particular form of waste wildflower that is mixed with biopolymer and a cellulosic aerogel. It's a patented formulation that it has the same kind of thermal properties and durability as traditional down, but doesn't involve anything in the animal trade. So we have jackets, puffers, we're moving more into like home goods as well. So this is again a case of how do we spread this around and let lots of companies use this. We have a lab in Italy and a production facility which we developed ourselves for this. This is a part of one of those transformative spaces where we had to kind of work on how do we incorporate into the existing down industry, but have a new formulation to start to kick off that area. We also work in certain things with alternative leathers. I won't go into that. There's a whole other space where this is partnerships, but the main thing about plant leathers, there's a lot of them out there. Most of them still use polyurethane as a coating. And this is one of the few that doesn't mirum. And there's also now new advances in making a fully bio-based polyurethane. I'm working with a new company to do that. So it's about transforming all of these ingredients one by one into something that can be 100% bio-based and degradable. Again, repurposing textile waste. I know you're going to hear more about this later, but we internally have a system at Pangaea in our manufacturing facility in Portugal where we collect all of our pre-consumer waste in the factory, separate it by color and material, and then have a whole new like product line that is our repurposed waste and it's new colors. So bright pink plus bright orange makes this peach color, and we sell these as, this is stuff that you can only get as waste. So there's no over dyeing. We just respin, and then the stuff that doesn't come, that isn't long enough in fiber, then gets turned into paper, which goes into our packaging. So nothing comes out of that facility as waste. Again, so thinking about, okay, moving into carbon capture now, there's a lot of work being done on this for, direct carbon capture. I'm just going to give a couple of examples of things that we have done in fashion. This is a collaboration with a company called Airink, a friend of mine from MIT who moved back to India. He was collecting literally the pollution from factories, the soot, the black soot, pure carbon. It's an amazing black form of black naturally occurring, but you have to clean it, detoxify it. He figured out how to do that and then turned it into a dye and used it for printing on garments. So this was a little piece of our collaboration. We worked with Naomi Campbell to get it out into the world. So this is a very kind of, it's low tech, high tech, right? You're literally collecting soot and cleaning it. And then the other end of carbon capture is what we think of as, pulling CO2 from the air and turning it into the base chemistries for multiple different kinds of plastics. And we created these sunglasses where the polycarbonate is made from, the base chemistries of that are made from captured CO2. We work with a company called 12. Actually, it was out in Silicon Valley. And here's a little short video on that. All of this is online if you want to look into it. I know I'm racing through. But this is a very, a new electrochemical reactor, which they're going to set up in connection with lots of different chemical plants to actually use their emissions to turn into product. But this was the first ever commercial product. And I think there's something to be said of what they're doing is so invisible and, not that accessible to people, but showing them that you can just make sunglasses. It's quite a simple product to actually explain what is happening. Air, sunglasses, right? And this is a huge part of what fashion has to play in these higher technologies. So this is still very expensive to do. This was a capsule collection, but it is scaling, and there are ways that it's going to get out there into the world. But this is going to change basically every form of plastic that we can create. And important to me to point out that we did the development of a polycarbonate, which is a long-lasting, high-quality plastic. We're not trying to turn this into PET, which is low grade. There's all sorts of nuances around plastic. It's, again, not evil or good. It's how do we understand it and how do we create it properly and where is it sunk and putting it into long-lasting things. Brood protein, biofabrication. This is my particular passion. We have been working on, with a lot of different technologies of how do you take DNA, part of the DNA that creates a particular kind of material and then basically transpose that into a microorganism, grow that in a lab. We made the first ever biofabricated hoodie with a company called Spiber in Japan, who has mastered this example of taking basically spider DNA and rebuilding it from scratch to create all the different proteins to create this incredible material that is silk. And that can have lots of different characteristics. So here's just a quick video on that project. They mix together a lot of the sequences of existing organisms that produce silk proteins and redesigned basically from scratch the building blocks. And then they grow this protein in bioreactors and they can extract it into all different kinds of things. So fabric being one of them, but all different kinds of other materials that are really a new class of materials. And again, this is showing that spider silk it's incredibly strong. It's incredibly light. There's so many different things that if you reformulate it, it starts as a liquid to extrude to cast, etc. It can really change a whole range of product categories. Another thing that we've done with is color. So this may be easier to understand. Like there's a part of an organism that, say the flower, that part of the DNA that makes it red. You pick out that piece of DNA and then put that into a microorganism and grow it in a lab. We did a project, and we have a continuous ongoing relationship with a company called Colorifics. We've installed their bioreactor in our dye production house in Portugal. So we live grow the bacteria, which creates a dye, and then transfer the dye into the dye drum. So you live dye the textiles just right on site. Here's a quick video. So if you're not aware, dye is a huge kind of secret toxic polluter inside of fashion. A lot of dyes are synthetic, especially ones that are very bright colors and toxic chemicals to have color fastness. So this is a way to actually create natural dye. So if there's a very bright color in nature, we're saying, okay, how can we bring that in a natural way? And by growing the organism, just the part of the organism that makes a dye, and not say the whole field of flowers, we're not using as many resources of land, water, etc. You're just really honing in on the resource that you want. And then last thing in biofabrication that's not exactly plant related, but not exactly fashion related, but we are moving in different realms of ingredients, and palm oil is a huge polluter across food, well, just about everything. It's in everything. And we did a first project with C16 Biosciences, which is a startup here in New York that has created a lab-grown palm oil, and we made a soap bar out of it. And this sold out immediately in Selfridges. It was a huge success, and we're now moving into this realm of we're tiptoeing into these new products. But it's very important to think about ingredient first. What is the right product? There's so many things that this can become. Okay, then programmable physical chemistry is my last topic. I know I'm gonna move on here, but we have started, again, there's so many invisible toxins in fashion, not just dyes, but pre-treatments, everything that you know about waterproofing, fire retardancy, even just like mercerizing. There's so many small things that you can take, an organic cotton garment and make it incredibly toxic and unbiodegradable just through what you do to it in the factory. And it could be quite secret. So we're looking at all different processes, whether they be biological. We use a form of peppermint oil as an antimicrobial treatment for like smell treatment. And then there's one that I really am super excited about. It's called multiplex laser surface enhancement, which uses a kind of chamber of a low frequency laser with gas, like natural gases, and mix them together into your superheated plasma, and you actually program the system. It's like programming the periodic table. This has been so new to me as both a material scientist and a computer scientist. It's like, oh my God, the world's come together to program what the gases do with the laser treatment. And then you can start doing these kinds of treatments, dye prep, even microfiber mitigation. We won a big competition on that, and it uses 0 water, 0 chemicals, 90% less energy uses. The impact measurements are just off the chart. So we have installed this in our factory in Portugal, and we're just getting underway with lots of different treatments. So this is kind of a new whole programmable system. And then other things about biosynthetic. So how do you start looking at the chemistries of synthetic materials like polyesters and rebuild those with biological based inputs? And there's a lot of work in this space. There's a company called Kintra, which we have a huge thing coming out, which is a new PBS material. And it's just sort of taking all the knowledge that we gained from looking at fossil fuel, everything that we've done with fossil fuel developments, just redoing those developments in bio-based materials. So it's a whole other realm of chemistry that's emerging. So in this area, the holy grail is to have 100% bio-based spandex. We're not there yet, but we're getting a lot closer. So activewear, no one's given up their athleisure gear. So we have to find the solutions for the synthetic qualities that we love. Like there's a lot of things that can be done with 100% natural-based materials that are actual fibers, and then we can do things with sustainable chemistries, which is one level of processing on. We also have a huge program around transparency, and this is this was at the core of our brand to say we're going to tell you where it's made, what it's made of, and make everything really accessible. Right now we have a project with Eon ID, which is a QR code, but we will eventually move into higher levels of sensors, and you can have communication with the customer. We also have a resale platform now with Pangaea. So just a quick example, Eon is a digital solution across the fashion industry. They're working with lots of big brands now, and luxury, et cetera. And brands are realizing that, oh my gosh, there's a secondary market for all of our stuff that we're just tossing away to somebody else. So if you can keep control of where all your stuff is in the world, you can actually capture that power of your product as you move through. We also do life cycle assessments on all of our projects, or 96% at this point, which is very expensive and very complicated. The metrics, I mean, if you're looking for a new career, like thinking about how we understand data inside of these systems and design the algorithms is such an important part of how we understand them, because measuring carbon has not been fixed, or we're not done figuring out how to measure carbon and impact. And there's so much work to be done there on the development of the algorithm side. So we're trying to do our best on at least, working with what's out there and then pointing out what's wrong with it. That's a whole other lecture. And then, we could say carbon is a new black, humility is a new green. We get a lot of press. I have to talk the press down to, like we haven't done it. We're not there. It's not perfect. There's a relationship we need a trusted relationship with, consumers and what we see in the press. Greenwashing is a huge thing, but I don't think it's always as intentional on the part of brands. There's a kind of miscommunication from factory all the way up through people in the fashion industry who don't know all the science, and then the journalists wanting to get a good headline. And we really have to have a trust with our consumers that we're going to tell you what we've done, we're going to tell you what we haven't done, but you should trust us because we have a plan, and we're going to tell you what the plan is to get there. And then lastly, thinking about spaces, we don't have any standalone stores yet. Well, we have one in Dubai Airport, which is an interesting story. But thinking about the experience of shopping and using spaces that can have a little bit more of an experiential element than just a store. Can we teach things? This was our first pop-up in Selfridges. I talked them into letting me put a compost pile in there, and all of our materials showing the connection to the materials. This is a little bit of my science museum exhibition background, but I think there's a whole new area of thinking about architecture and urban spaces that are commingling. So it's not so consumption. So justifying the impact, the carbon footprint of a space should have multiple different uses. And that's just a couple more examples. And that's it for me. So sorry, I should have said at the beginning, but I hope you guys are collecting your questions and putting them into the chat. I couldn't see it as I was going. Sorry about that. But I know we're going to have questions at the end. So okay, sorry about that. I just hit the time right on, right?
And yeah, Amanda, thank you. I mean, it's amazing how many of the topics you mentioned are right in public health. I mean, just incredible. But let's move on. Unfortunately, we're only going to have time for probably about 2 or 3 questions now. Then we will have our next speaker and then some more time for questions. So let's just go quickly in order. Ina, please tell us your question.
Hi. I'm curious about consumer perspective because I'm doing a project for a challenge lab course here in Berkeley, and we are also looking at this sustainable solutions to fast fashion and helping consumers be more sustainable. And for a lot of people, like they just the biggest barrier isn't even like money per se, because like there are cheaper alternatives, but it's just like shifting their behavior. So what I noticed that like you had like kind of 2 different ways that you were marketing your brand. One as like really marketing it as like the sustainable philosophy. And then the other is just like you were talking about how like the value of a sustainable clothing is just like one that's like its value isn't in the fact that it's sustainable, but in the quality, the style, and also it happens to be sustainable. So how do you like reconcile both of those?
Well, I don't. I think they're both super important. And I think that it's going after different consumers, right? So there are going to be the people on the edge who care a lot about the science and want to know more. And I think it's about having a kind of tiered approach of access points where if you see kind of an ad from us, like, or you see a celebrity or something, you can just like it and want it. And we know that you buying the clothing it's a better alternative than you buying fast fashion. And we also have a lot of consumer feedback that when they get the clothing, because we've worked really, really hard on the textiles, that it's softer and people want to wear it. So they go, oh, you ruined the rest of my wardrobe. There's this thing of like, I can't take it off. This is what we were hearing a lot of. And so that part of it is a huge part of return customers. But on top of that, just making people kind of want it and want to keep wearing it as well. Then there's the people who you have the different entry points where you can dig into our website, like see the research, see that, if you want to know, like, what are the claims, go down deeper. And this is something that I learned from kind of teaching science. It's like, especially in informal situations, it's like, have something that grabs people, but then if they don't need to know, they don't want to know more, they don't need to, but you then provide the access, which creates the trust. So I don't want it to be one or the other. We have huge conversations between marketing and this and that. And we've, I'm not saying it's perfect, but we've settled on this, it's not even a dual approach. It's actually a spectrum, right? Where we also try to use, something high fashion in one place, in an ad in Paris, something that, is more technical that would go into Silicon Valley, or, it's really about understanding the nuances of market and kind of being out there while still being very clear with, like our brand video is about these beautiful images of nature that are fun, stylish, they attract young people. It's a little bit of humor. We try to be very optimistic and positive. We're solutions driven and we're not complaining about what's going on. So that is kind of where we tie together.
Okay, thank you. Also, I do ballet, and I've seen your the costumes that you were talking about, the lights ones, and I'm a big fan of them. So
thank you. Yeah, that was a great project way back. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Zofia, please, your question, and then we're going to go to the next speaker right after this.
Great. Thanks. Thank you, Amanda. I'm curious because I saw that Pangea is actually a certified B Corp, and you're also clearly, a big trendsetter when it comes to the sustainability and in the fashion industry, doing a lot to even change how other companies are looking at it as well. Plus, you're basing a lot of your work on the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm curious if you guys have ever thought about starting like a corporate foundation, for example, to structurize a lot of this philanthropic work, or is that not something that's really in scope for you?
Yeah, we actually have that. I didn't bring it up. There's so much to talk about, but we've done kind of an offshoot now. We've always had philanthropy at our core, and like, we have the donating to trees and, like all the things that you would expect. We work on, collaborations with, like, right now we have one going on with coral gardeners, but we also have just launched something called Be the Change, BEE, which is a biodiversity foundation, and it's going to work a little bit like Project Red did. You guys might be too young to know what this is, but Bono had launched a product line, sort of a whole initiative where you would do collaborations with existing brands like Apple or a car company or whatever, and then a certain amount of the proceeds goes towards an initiative, and we're all about saving the bees, which is at the core of biodiversity. So that's what so that's launched, and you can look it up. We launched it at COP this year, and we have a documentary coming out with the director of Kiss the Ground, the Netflix documentary. It's gonna launch at Cannes this year in May. So you'll hopefully be hearing more, but you can still look up Be the Change to see that. So it's
Great.
Pangaea, it's juxtaposed, but it's a separate foundation.
Great, thank you.
Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much. And if you can stay,
I
working
will.
in the background, that'd be
Yeah.
awesome. Very good. So
Turn
let
off
me
my
go
video.
quickly to our next speaker. And I would like to introduce Junghoon Gim, who merges expertise in fashion design with a passion for sustainability. He's got a master's of design in fashion, emphasizing textiles and sustainability from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Junghoon combines creative flair with environmental awareness, and his experiences in organic farming in South Korea deepened his commitment to eco-friendly practices. Professionally, he has contributed significantly to Trove Yardley's mission of textile waste reduction by facilitating the resale of clothing from major brands. Fluent in Korean, Junghoon's approach demonstrates how technology and sustainable design can intersect to improve environmental outcomes in fashion. So please join me in welcoming Junghoon Gim, who is actively participating in shaping a more sustainable fashion future. Junghoon, if you can share your screen, please.
Hi. Okay. I will. Just one second. Thank you so much for the introduction. Just to clarify, my last name is pronounced Gim. I know it's an unusual spelling,
Okay.
but I did want to clarify that.
Thank you.
In English, it is often a K because it's a mistranslation. It is closer to the G sound. Okay. One second, please. I'm assuming everyone is seeing the screen now.
Think so. Yeah, we do not see it.
Okay, I need to open up the PowerPoint. So hopefully,
Okay.
a little bit slow. So
I also have your PowerPoint in case it doesn't work.
okay, great. Thank you so much, Professor Marlon. Yeah, I was really influenced by my experiences living in South Korea in a rural area because I have no farming background before then. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I really wasn't around agriculture. So a lot of how I started thinking about materials actually came from that experience. Obviously, natural fibers. In the talk I'm going to give, I'm going to initially give a quick overview of the different types of fibers as well, and then hopefully we have enough time to do a deep dive about cotton, how cotton is grown, what kinds of resources are used to grow cotton. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So the my talk, the title is Environmental Problems and Solution in the Fashion Industry. This is actually a picture of a place in South Korea. It's called the Two Waterheads, Muddy in Korean. And it was a site of a protest, actually, where the Korean government was going to pave and demolish this area. And so this is one of the places that I ended up farming at and learning about ecology. So there's some key points. Let me see if I can see my key points. So the environmental problems in the fashion industry are part of greater problems. So in globalization, agriculture, manufacturing, livestock farming, lack of global oversight, the historical outcomes of unequal regional development, and global colonialism. So I really want people, I would like the students to really look at this from multiple points of view. I think it's important so that you don't think it's just about clothes. It's actually not just about clothes. It's about various industries. So the second point is exactly what I just said, is that really fashion intersects with many industries. So really, if you want to find solutions, you need to find solutions in multiple industries, not just fashion. So the third point are, there are no perfect solutions, just trade-offs and improvements. And I think that's important. So it's not an all or nothing 0-1 game. You know, you really have to be open to things that can make things better, because again, you're dealing with a complex system. And then the fourth point, and I think this is probably the most important point, which is often overlooked. So to save our civilization from societal collapse, our solutions must be profitable. So there are many businesses trying to deal with various issues, environmental issues, social justice issues, public health issues, but we do live in a capitalistic system. So there has to be consistent funding somehow. The money has to come from somewhere consistently. So I think it is really important for people to understand it is a business, whatever you do. So this is the overview that I mentioned before. The various types of materials used in fashion. Topic 2, some solutions to the problems these materials create. And then hopefully we will have enough time to do a deep dive into cotton. I'm just going to put my timer on. Professor Marlin, do I have 30 minutes or 20 minutes?
20 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first thing, I really recommend that, just like food, look at the labels on your clothes. Okay, so you will find a label that indicates the type of fiber that the clothes is made out of. Is it cotton? Is it polyester? Is it a blend of cotton and polyester? And then there will also be a label saying where is it made. Okay, so that's also important for social justice issues. Also, different, of course, where you are on the globe has different regulations about what chemicals can be used. So the first group of fibers I'm looking at is plant fibers. So this is in agriculture. This is a rough list. I'm sure there are more. Cotton, the most popular. Linen, hemp, ramie, piña. That's from pineapples, pineapple leaves. Avocados from banana leaves, bamboo, soy silk. Soy silk is actually from soybeans. It's a remnant when you make soybean oil, and you can process it to make something that's like silk. So my claim is that the worst offender is cotton and bamboo. I will go into detail about this later in my presentation. So I'm an advocate of linen, of hemp, of other fibers. So there's manufacturing of synthetic fibers. So synthetic fibers are woven plastics. They're from oil. So and again, it doesn't mean that it's horrible. I'm not saying, oh, this is a 0-1 sum game. It's not. But I think people just need to be aware of what is it that they're buying, what is it they're wearing. Okay, so there's polyester, there's nylon, there's acrylic, there's polyamide. Most vegan leather is a type of plastic, it's petroleum-based, polyurethane, polyvinyl, PVC, and then cotton polyester blends. I put this here. The reason why is because once you start blending cotton with polyester, the fabric behaves more like a synthetic when it comes to things like, will it break down quickly? Is it biodegradable in a short amount of time? Can you recycle? Can you actually use that fiber again and make more fabric? When you blend things, from my understanding, that it becomes difficult, maybe impossible. I'm not a chemist, but that's my understanding. Okay. So here are some solutions. Solution 1, recycling the synthetic fibers and combining them with new, often they're referred to as virgin synthetic fibers. So a lot of clothing companies are already doing this. So Patagonia does this. I think I've seen this with certain REI. REI is a conglomerate, so they have multiple brands. But I know that this is something that on the tag itself you will see, and which is nice because then you can take polyester and you can use it again. But there are limitations with that, so you can't do that forever, right? Eventually, the fiber becomes kind of brittle, rough. So you can only do it a couple of times. I don't know how many times, but again, it's not like an infinite loop. Solution 2, waste energy plant that can burn synthetic fibers as well as other trash and convert it into energy. So this already exists in developed nations, so such as America and Canada, Denmark, Sweden, etc. And this is an example of it's a really cool one. This is the architect, he created this in Copenhagen, Denmark, and it's a ski slope as well. That's why it has that green at the very top. Some of the limitations with this is that they do need to separate the materials based on the compound because things burn differently. There's a different burning points, also treatments. I'm assuming would be different. So you can't just take a bunch of different stuff and just throw it into the furnace. So it's more, an organized process. The other limitations with these two solutions are really, these are for countries that have access to high-end technology. So these are developed nations. These are not nations that don't have the low-tech environments. Cannot do this. So this is a term about the global south. So if you kind of look at the world, the global south are the areas where people don't have access to high-end technology. So these are the regions where oftentimes the waste of clothing, like once someone doesn't want their clothes, where does it go? Well, eventually, if it can't be made into rags, it can't be, resold. There's, basically it's just treated as trash at that point. It will end up somewhere in the global south. So like Haiti, Pakistan, India, these are also the areas where a lot of chemical processing is happening for clothes. It kind of oftentimes will be there at the beginning stages and then end up there as well. So some of the things that happen, unfortunately, is that people start running out of space. There's just too much. It's not just clothes, but textile waste is part of it. And so then burning it is a way to get rid of it. But again, if you don't have the technology to trap the heat and the energy, you're just really releasing it into the atmosphere, and toxic chemicals as well. If you put it in the landfills, again, if it's not organic, and again, even if it is organic, if it's been treated with so many chemicals, it doesn't really biodegrade, and then the chemicals can seep into the land itself. So what can you do in a low-tech environment? There have been, in these environments, really amazing, mostly women, that take clothes and say, look, why don't we make something from it that we can sell? So that is solution 3, upcycling fabric to make another product, like clothes, bags, rugs, blankets, threads. And I really want to highlight that this is happening because of resilient and resourceful women and young girls are oftentimes in these industries. It's interesting also to see that this is something that bigger companies are now trying to see if it's profitable. So Patagonia did this whole line of recrafted. So they took clothes where, let's say, a part of it has been ripped, so they can't resell it as is. So then they cut it up and they make a new jacket. And this is a synthetic. Cotopaxi also has done this, I think, more in the beginning of their brand, where they would take leftover textile fabric and make something like a bag. So these are approaches. Patagonia recrafted. They didn't continue with this, so I think that it might not have been as profitable as they were hoping. And then this is something I learned through Trove. Actually, we were part of this process of selling this for them on their used section. Cotopaxi as well as one of the partners with Trove. They have been doing well. So this is, I think that there is definitely a possibility. Obviously, you can make a business doing this. So these are also companies with a lot of names, though, as well. I mean, they're not like a mid-sized company. So that's also something to take into account. Eileen Fisher, also a partner of Trove. She's done some really interesting things. One of the things is upcycling by felting. This is actually, this is not synthetic, but I did want to put this in here. She upcycled denim through plywood, and denim is a cotton. It's not usually easily made into felt, but she used a needle felting loom and then used the fabric for like an art piece. You can use it for pillows. You can use it for clothing is a bit difficult because of durability. Eventually, once it's been felted and you wash it so many times, then it can start breaking down. So I haven't seen her use it for clothing, but upholstery. She did a West Elm collaboration. this also is something that Eileen Fisher has done, where she actually just mends it. There's a hole, so she just meant that's the little blue dot here, and then she's selling it for $225, and people do buy it. So that's kind of for me like, wow, okay, that's again, it's a company that's very well established and has a following. So, but it is nice to see that this is happening right now. This is also something very clever that Eileen Fisher, she was actually one of the partners that I was had a lot of work. I was responsible for her clothing, so that's why I know a lot about her clothing. And with this, what she did was the people that work for her, they take clothes that might have a little discoloration or a stain, or maybe it's in a colorway that isn't selling for whatever reason, and it's dipped in indigo, and then it becomes like a new product, and people are more likely to buy it. So this is part of her indigo collection. So the next fiber I'm going to talk about is it's a synthetic plant fiber. So these are things like acetate and rayon. Basically, it's cellulose from wood, and then it has been broken down, and then it's made into a thread and then into a fabric. And these are the two that are pretty often used, acetate and rayon. Within rayon, there are different types, and these refer to the different chemical processes. So not all rayons are the same. And this is actually a problem because certain processes of making rayon is actually more toxic, while certain things are better for you. Tencel, the trademark name for Lysel, is the only environmentally friendly rayon because it does not use carbon desulfides, which release toxic gases to the textile worker. It's also a closed loop system. The chemicals that they use to break down the cellulose, they can use it again and again. So the problem with this is that, again, governments should force textile companies to label the specific type of rayon they're selling so informed consumers can choose environmentally friendly products. Oftentimes, you will just say, when you look at the tag, it will just say rayon. So you have no idea. It's like, well, which rayon is it? There are some companies that do make it a point to indicate what type of rayon it is, so that the informed consumer can say, oh, this is Tencel Lysel, I'm going to buy this. Livestock farming. Okay.
June, about 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Okay. Let's talk about this then. This is interesting with leather. So there are companies that are using pineapple, the leftover pineapple leaves, to make a type of leather. It is true that the coating of it is like, I think 5% still petroleum, but it is a large improvement from past use of petroleum for the coating. There's also mushroom leather. Two companies actually in the Bay Area that are doing this. Milo through Bulk Threads, and then Michael Works. There's also cactus leather. I actually have some cactus leather shoes. So I am very interested in this story because it was actually Carmen Hieso. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing her name, but she really, when she went to the Philippines in the 1990s, she was really horrified by the conditions in the leather tanneries there, and she, thought to herself, "Hey, I don't want to be part of this anymore." She noticed that that piña, which is actually made from pineapple, it's a fabric from Belize. She realized, oh, this is an interesting material, and that is what inspired her to start making leather from pineapple fibers. It's a waste product of growing pineapples. Oh. Um, okay. Um, this company, I'm also very, I'm biased. I like this company better than the other mushroom leather company in the Bay Area. They're actually doing quite well financially right now. Michael works, and it's the mycelium, so not the fruiting body, but the basically almost like the roots. Again, this is not a plant; it's fungus. It's a separate family. Um, the reishi mushroom in particular, the mycelium is used to make leather, and it was created actually by two artists. They had no background in the sciences and biology, nothing. So I really like that story. Philip Ross, he wanted to use the mycelium to make bricks because by weight it's stronger than concrete. And then he met Sophia Wang, who was a dancer and getting her PhD in UC Berkeley in poetry, actually. So, and they happened to realize, hey, we can make this into leather. And they were smart enough to realize that they had no business background. And so they did go through a process of learning through an incubator. And they partnered with this guy who has a background in materials science and business. So again, I think it's very important to realize it needs to be profitable, whatever your ideas are, to help people to make the world a better place. Is this a good place to start? That's to stop.
Sure. Yeah, that would be perfect. And we have time for, again, 2 questions, and then we're going to run to our next speaker. June, thank you so much for your talk. Ava, please go right ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about like the technologies that are in place right now to like downcycle fibers or textiles, because I can imagine like it can be really difficult to downcycle textiles that are like a mix of different types of fibers. So I was just wondering, like, is there a technology out there that can do that now? Yeah.
As far as I know, I don't think there is. I mean, if I again, my background is not in biology or chemistry, but I think that once fibers have intermixed, like let's say cotton and polyester, it really starts behaving like polyester, so it doesn't biodegrade quickly. The other thing is that you can't really burn it easily for as an energy source. Again, you when you start burning things, you really need to know what are you burning, what's the chemical compound. Things have different burning points, and different materials release different chemicals when you start burning them. So so that's why polyester and cotton blends are, based on my research, should be avoided. It's better to, I would rather just go with a 100% polyester than polyester cotton.
Can I just jump in quickly to add one thing here? There's nothing commercialized, you're right, but there's a couple of different research projects which are worth looking at if you're interested in this space. One of them is called the Green Machine at Hong Kong RITA. It's an amazing innovation that does actually work on separating materials and into both natural fibers and synthetics. Again, not fully commercialized. And also the company Evernew, which specializes in recycling mostly cotton, but they do have a separation technology at the beginning of their platform. So I just look up those two if you're curious about the space. Sorry.
Thank you. No, great.
No,
Please, Amanda, first jump in anytime. David, we have time for your question, and then we're going to run to our next speaker.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about how do you feel about like is all these products are generally made from like waste products, and I see that like it's very like up price where like the profit margins are pretty big and like pretty inaccessible for majority of people. So I was wondering like how do you feel about that?
Again, I don't think they're perfect solutions. You really need to start somewhere. There are, I think it's good that people are starting to figure out, hey, how do we make this more accessible? Certain things, certain practices that are already in play, um, the felting is something that is accessible, right? An Fisher is felting wool as well as cotton and reusing it for other purposes. You can also, for example, felt denim for insulation. So that is also that is happening. If you're talking about technologies that are more complex processes that are more expensive, I think that I have hope personally. You know, I think that people are smart and resourceful wherever they are on the planet. Just like, you know, women you know, in developing countries realizing, hey, look, I can actually make a business by resewing things and making it into something else.
Amanda, maybe you have a comment about the cost of some of these new products.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the beginning of the initial question, but so we're in this point in the industry where scale up is one of the biggest issues, and which is why we're so explicitly trying to, you know, sell to different brands. We need, like, the prices will come down as we scale up. So we do need the engagement of, you know, LVMH and Kering and the big partners to work on this. But for, you know, some of the things are fantastic in the sense that when you are talking about waste, if you design the supply chain properly, it's actually free. So, you know, things like, you know, like agricultural waste as opposed to an animal product, if you can get through the transition of the cost of the scale up, then you will have a, you know, a source that can be competitive. There's nothing, what I mean is that there's nothing technologically stopping these things from being cost competitive or even cheaper than existing methods. It's really about infrastructure change, and that's where we're relying on some of the larger infrastructure around impact investment. That's not just fashion money, but you know, you mentioned Junghoon mentioned at the beginning, like, these are global issues that affect like, you know, all different food, construction, like basically every industry on earth. And so if we can take the impact dollars, the rise, that's one of the areas of investment that's absolutely on the rise right now, while economies are, you know, kind of going down. Then that's encouraging. But yes, did I answer the question properly?
Awesome. And, you know, this is a perfect segue for our next speaker. So let's go right into it and welcome Aditi Mayer. And she is a distinguished visual storyteller and climate activist at the forefront of sustainable fashion. Aditi's passion ignited in 2013 after I believe it's Rana Plaza collapse, driving her to uncover and challenge the exploitation and environmental damage inherent in the fashion industry, especially its impact on communities of color. She has since emerged as a global voice for integrating sustainability with social justice in fashion, engaging audiences from Harvard to the Global Fashion Summit and beyond. Aditi's efforts to promote diversity and systemic change in fashion have earned her recognition in leading publications and roles with significant initiatives like State of Fashion and Intersectional Environmentalist. Today, she will share some insights from her collaboration with Coach, among others, in transforming waste into value. So this is a topic that resonates deeply with our course's focus on sustainability. So please, a warm welcome to Aditi Mayer. Aditi, please feel free to share your screen, and welcome.
Thank you so much. So great to be here. Hi, everyone. Give me a moment. I'm just going to share my screen and then we'll get started. Okay, I don't think that is working. Can you tell me if you see it?
Not yet. No.
No. Okay.
Yeah, we've been having a little bit of technical issues, but hopefully you have permission to share. So hopefully.
If you share the PowerPoint window and not the full window, that sometimes makes a difference.
Right. I think I might have to go into my system preferences. It's the issue that it's showing right now.
Mm.
But that window is not opening. What if I share, well, I could share the presentation with you if that works and just tell you when to, does that work?
Yeah, that would be fine. Yeah.
I will send it over in the chat. It's not a crazy, beautiful presentation or anything, but just to have some visual cues.
Okay, very good. Let me share it then.
Perfect.
And very good.
And if you want to go in slideshow mode, I'll get started.
Yeah. Okay. All right, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
Okay, and if you go ahead and go to the second slide. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Aditi Mayer. I've been in the space for the past decade now. I had my start when I actually was in my own undergrad career. I studied journalism, specifically literary journalism and international studies at UC Irvine. And it was 2013 when I was starting my undergraduate career. And as mentioned in the intro, this is when the Rana Plaza factory collapse took place. And for those that are not familiar, Rana Plaza was an 8-story garment factory producing out of Dhaka, Bangladesh, which is a hot spot for garment production. And essentially what happened with Rana Plaza is that structural cracks were found in this factory, and it was ordered to evacuate. But there was so much pressure from upper management to have workers complete orders that they went back to work. And the next day, the factory collapsed and frames one of the biggest industrial disasters of our time. And there was a series of major brands that were implicated in this factory collapse, from H&M to Mango, a lot of these major fast fashion names. So this was quite a reckoning in the world of fashion, but it also spilled over to conversations around ethics and what essentially happens when you have a dominant fashion model that is so predicated on speed, scale, and output that it comes at the cost of human lives. And so at that point, I was starting my undergraduate career, and I started thinking critically about how the dominant fashion model had, again, normalized violence as part of business and as usual, and what change can look like in that context. And you could go over to the third slide. Professor, would you mind going to the third slide?
I think this is it. Finding my regional context.
Yes. Okay. It's not changing on my screen, but that's okay.
Oh, really? Has it changed for everybody else?
No.
They haven't.
No.
Huh.
I wonder if you go to slideshow mode, unless you're already on it and the screen has just frozen. Oh, there you go. Yeah, we're here now. Perfect. So during this time, I started thinking about, okay, what can I do where I'm based? I'm based in Southern California, born and raised here. And what was interesting at that time was a lot of the discourse that we were having around labor exploitation was that it was this distant abstraction that happened overseas. But what I came to realize is that LA's second biggest industry was actually the cut and sew garment industry. And we were a huge hotbed for garment production in downtown LA. And to just contextualize a bit more about the industry is largely an underground and informal economy. Data shows us that it's about 50,000 workers within the garment sector, but that is most likely an underestimation of the true scale of the industry. And a major reason for that is a lot of the workforce is undocumented. And so what we saw at that time was a lot of workers who were attempting to speak out around conditions of wage theft or unfair labor practices were often threatened with deportation from their employers. So we saw a dynamic where there was a lot of instances of workplace intimidation, a general lack of understanding of what workers' rights were, just no matter what your immigration status was. And so I started working with an amazing organization called the Garment Worker Center, which began in the 1990s in downtown LA in response to a labor trafficking case where they found a sweatshop within an apartment complex in El Monte, which is a neighborhood in LA. And so that was the foundation that made way for the Garment Worker Center, which very much centers garment worker leadership and does a series of campaigns around major wage and labor violators within LA. So they've done campaigns around names like Fashion Nova to Forever 21. And so at that time, as a journalism student, my initial involvement was through covering these issues. Here you'll see one of the photos that I took of a garment worker named Juliana during one of their anti-sweatshop rallies against, again, some of the major labor violators. Throughout this process of kind of documenting the ongoing resistance that was happening in downtown LA, I started to develop relationships with the folks at the center and noticed that a major issue that they were running into is they had a series of all these campaigns against specific brands, but there was major gaps within the policy landscape of LA that kind of allowed labor exploitation to continue. So Juliana, who you see pictured here, was one example of that. She was one of 4 garment workers who were working at a factory that was creating pieces for Ross, Dress for Less. Many of you might be familiar, which is often seen as a brand that sells, extra stock from other brands, but they actually produce their own garments as well. And she was one of 4 garment workers who were collectively owed $800,000 in unpaid wages between all of them. And this wasn't just an empty case. It was a case that had gone through the labor court and they had all the evidence to show this. But the legal landscape allowed for this gap where Ross was able to blame their subcontractor, aka the factory blamed Ross, and there was a lack of accountability. And so this was kind of the genesis for a lot of the policy work that later came with the Garment Worker Center, specifically the Garment Worker Protection Act. And if anyone here is interested in this intersection of labor justice, worker rights, and how that ties into a myriad of other issues from immigration, gender, etc., I encourage you to look more into this piece of policy, which actually passed 2 years back. And it was a huge moment within the landscape of fashion justice and labor justice specifically, because it sets a precedent that throughout the supply chain, there is now accountability between all of the partners. And it also addressed some other major issues. One thing that we saw at that time around 2013, 2014 was that most garment workers in LA were being paid the piece rate, AKA they're being paid per piece they make as opposed to an hourly wage, which should be at least the minimum wage. And many years ago, so maybe 30 years ago, a lot of garment workers who had been in the industry for many decades had said that the piece rate was a way to kind of encourage workers to produce a bit more if they were fast at what they were doing. But over time, the piece rate had remained stagnant. And so what we saw was there was workers that were making as little as $3 to $5 an hour. And you contextualize that in a city like LA. And so another thing that the Garment Worker Protection Act did is it eliminated the piece rate and created the minimum wage as the price floor of what garment workers should be paid. So that was another major element of the Garment Worker Protection Act. We could go ahead and go to the next slide. And so, as you can hear, a lot of my personal genesis within the work of fashion was from a lens of human and social justice, understanding that the fashion industry preys on already existing power dynamics, especially in how it treats its garment workers, and that needs to be addressed within the larger fabric of the conversation around sustainable or ethical fashion. This naturally spills into the environmental justice element of fashion as well. We know fashion to be one of the most polluting industries when we look at it from everything from the raw material level to factories with runoff and dyes. There's a lot of lack of regulation around the world and issues that need to be addressed there. I think what's also interesting about my work in this space is it began during a time where Instagram was quite young as a platform. And as someone who loves visual storytelling and fashion, I saw an opportunity there as well. So at this time, the idea of the fashion blogger wasn't new by any means, but was kind of burgeoning on Instagram. And I saw this as an opportunity to talk about issues within fashion while also engaging within the visual culture of fashion. And I always call it the Trojan horse effect. And kind of posing questions of how do we create more touch points for folks to understand the critical work of social and environmental justice. And so I always try to create this balance in my work of building both online and offline. I think the work that organizations like the Garment Workers Center are doing is critical when it comes to building power from the bottom up and addressing a broken system through grassroots organizing and capacity building. But I also think we need creative awareness and engagement opportunities for the consumer body. And we know that social media is a huge tool tied to this. And so we could go on to the 6th slide. And so this kind of goes into this idea of de-influencing. Your professor may have sent you an article that I wrote for Vogue, I think it was last year, about this idea of de-influencing that had really grown in popularity at the start of this past year on TikTok. And what we saw with this de-influencing trend, I'll say, is a lot of folks being very fed up with influencer culture on social media, that we have this culture on social media that is often tied to mindless consumption, major clothing hauls, most often from fast fashion brands like Shein or something like that. And so the idea of de-influencing kind of emerged when you saw folks online influencing you not to buy or maybe buying an alternative. And I think what's really interesting about the growth of this de-influencing idea in our cultural zeitgeist is that it marks a moment where there's a bit more critical thinking within the consumer body of how much we're being told to buy and what we're told to buy. And so as someone who has kind of existed online with the goal of providing education, awareness, or alternative brands that we can shop at that kind of champion ethics and sustainability, that's an idea that I kind of wanted to share today, is this idea of de-influencing. And so my work today is a balance between, again, working with organizations that are doing that work from a grassroots level, and also working with brands through social media, consulting, and content, which I think is an interesting balance because, as I've mentioned, the dominant industry has a myriad of issues. So how do we actually inspire change on a systemic level, but also the stories that we're telling as a fashion industry, which has historically been rooted in, again, mindless consumption, ego, exclusion, and kind of change that paradigm. You could go on to slide. Yeah, we could start here. So I graduated from UC Irvine in, let's see, 2018, 2019-ish, but I don't remember the exact time. And one of the first things that I did upon graduating was applying to this fellowship, the National Geographic Fulbright, which was a really interesting program. A lot of you might be familiar with the Fulbright as a research program where you go abroad to a country and do some sort of academic research. But they actually have a partnership with National Geographic, which focuses more so on multimedia storytelling. And so I had pitched a project where I would go to India for a year and look at stories of fashion within India. And there were so many different angles that I could have done with this. Obviously, I've talked about the dominant fashion model and how broken that is. But one dimension that I was specifically interested in is what would an alternative look like from fast fashion? And are there cultures around the world that have championed an alternative approach to fashion? What can we learn from that? And as a South Asian woman, I knew that there was so much to be learned from India. And so to kind of sum up the significance of this, when we think about fast fashion or the dominant fashion model today, so much of power is centralized in terms of, fast fashion CEOs are among the richest billionaires in the world. And we know there's a myriad of issues when it comes to how much their garment workers are being paid. We see a retail landscape where this needs to be fact checked, but I think upwards of 60% of what we find on retail shelves is made of synthetic fibers. And so there's a major conversation around regenerative agriculture and fashion. And so in India, I felt like there was a lot to learn because historically in India, each region has had its own decentralized fashion production, we can say. So every region is known for a specific fiber that grows natively to that region. We see specific artisanal practices that very much hang in the balance in our world today in terms of being preserved or maintained, that are tied to inherently sustainable forms of production. So natural dyeing based on the flora and fauna that grow in that region, which also kind of underpins an economy of that space as well. So what I've wrote here is we have so many lenses around ancestral wisdom, localized production, and regional ecologies that can be learned through fashion. Obviously, this doesn't mean that tomorrow we're all just going to go back to these village economies, but I think there's a lot to be learned in terms of decentralized production here. So here we have some photos from my project. I decided to focus on the state of Punjab specifically, where my family is from, because I come from a farming background. And I went to a region of Punjab that has historically been the cotton belt of Punjab. And so I think one question we'll often hear posed a lot within the fashion landscape is what is the most sustainable fiber, right? We hear things like cotton is a thirsty plant, and like maybe hemp or linen are presented as more sustainable alternatives. And those are very valid conversations. But there are also regions around the world, specifically India, where there are rain-fed cottons, for instance. So I think the element of regional ecologies is incredibly important as well. And so in this specific region of Punjab, again, it was a cotton belt region, but within the 60s and 70s, so in the 1960s and 70s, there were some major changes through government schemes under what was called the Green Revolution, which is not as sustainable as it may sound from its title. And under the Green Revolution, farmers who were at one point doing largely subsistence farming, so planting a variety of crops native to that region to feed their own immediate communities, and using approaches that were organic or regenerative inherently, were kind of forced to switch to paddy or rice farming, with the intention of creating higher yields that would address feeding the nation, essentially. And initially, this meant, using more chemical inputs and pesticides, but we saw a shift to monocropping now. And paddy is a very water-intensive crop. It is not native to the region of Punjab. And so although yields around this paddy initially were quite abundant, what we saw over time is the water table began to fall. There was a series of health issues that came about because of the increased use of chemical inputs. Farmers eventually came into debt as a result of higher costs associated with all those inputs. And so it is quite a grim landscape today. But what is interesting is there are a crop of more elderly farmers that are attempting to kind of return to what once was, specifically with cotton farming and using regenerative approaches. And what they said was there was a whole social fabric that once existed in these regions where the farmers were planting cotton and they would give the raw materials to spinners and weavers who would then create the fabric, and there was this whole economy rooted in agriculture to fashion. And that's what you see in these photos. If you go to slide 8, this was really interesting. This was a husband-wife duo. And this was, apologies. So the man that you see in this photo was one of the farmers that obviously went from going from cotton farming to paddy. And while we were engaging in this conversation, he said, you know, give me a moment. I want to show you something. And he goes to his shed and he pulls out a paper plastic bag essentially and dumps out a bunch of cotton. And he said, 30 years ago, I decided to save this cotton because I saw how many changes were happening in the industry. And I decided to save these for future generations, but kind of forgot about it. And this conversation inspired me to show this to you. So he's showing me a cotton here that is the one that is kind of native to that region. It's naturally brown. And it was really cool because I was there with a local partner who does a lot of work within organic farming. And so they were able to germinate some of the seeds from this cotton that he showed. His wife is a weaver and spinner, so she was showing me her process. And if you go to slide 9, these are some of the other elders that are engaging in the work of cultural preservation, but I think that conversation is so deeply tied to sustainability as we know it today. So that's an example of the more journalistic storytelling work that I've been doing, especially in India. And if you go to slide 10, I can tell you a bit about the more branded commercial work that I have been doing. And I thought I would talk about this specific project that I did recently with Coach. So we know Coach as a heritage leather brand manufacturer. And so they are a very interesting case study because they recently launched a sub-brand called Coachtopia. And Coachtopia is almost like an experiment on the brand's end of how they can address the linear fashion system. So when we think about fashion today, we know it is quite linear, right? We take, we make, we produce, we sell, and then that product is usually disposed of. But can we close the loop on that and create take-back programs, repair programs, and also think about the waste that is generated within the production side of fashion? How do we address that? Because there's so much waste associated with actually constructing a piece, an accessory. And so this is actually a documentary that you can all go watch after the fact. But we actually went to Coach's oldest manufacturing partner, which is actually in Chennai, India. And this factory had to work very closely with Coach to construct a new set of logistics around how they were producing. So traditionally, how it would work is designers would request a set of Pantone sheets in XYZ color, and they would create a design based on what they had in their imagination. But they started to collect every last piece of waste with this new model. You'll see in this photo that, when they had little edges when it comes to like the leather that was cut that would usually be disposed of, but they began to collect every single piece of waste. And now designers were given the challenge of designing backwards. So how can they create with a finite set of materials that is placed in front of them? And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see that they're actually also employing craft techniques, where these were some of the leftover pieces of leather that they're now using weaving techniques for. And even this is not a perfect system because it takes time to scale. It's a lot slower in its process, but I think that this is a really interesting example of brands trying to address the challenge of a very linear system and all of the creative challenges that come with that as a result. So within the documentary, we talk about how that affects things around quality control, to the skills needed to actually produce a bag. So I wanted to share that with you all. And you can go ahead and go to slide 12. I know we're running short on time, so I also just wanted to talk about the other dimension of my work, which is around education and speaking, whether that's forums like this or cultural spaces, fashion weeks. I think when we think about the climate crisis and, kind of inspiring climate action more broadly, we have a crisis of storytelling. And I say that because I think so much of the data around the urgency around climate change has been with us for decades now. I think it's been 2 decades since Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth has come out. Really important pieces of work, but I think as someone who belongs to this cusp of Gen Z and millennials, I'm often thinking about what actually inspires change. And I think we need more and more touch points for folks to understand how they could make small changes or advocate for larger systemic shifts. And I found that fashion is a really powerful medium for that, because at face value, I can speak to an industry like fashion that is inspired by aesthetics and beauty, but inject conversations around culture and intention and ecologies. It goes in so many different directions, and power dynamics when we, again, circle this conversation back to that labor and social justice angle that we started with. And so I encourage all of you, no matter what your major or background is, to kind of think about what are those touch points for you. Fashion is just one example, but it can look so many different ways. You could go ahead and go to slide 13. So when it comes to, maybe leaving you with a call to action or ways to get involved, there's obviously the domain of storytelling, which is the world that I belong to, which touches everything from social media to journalism. An amazing organization that I've had the pleasure of working with in the past has been the Solutions Journalism Network, which is all about news reporting, editorial reporting, that is injecting solutions as part of the process of reporting on something, which I think is really, really critical. And so they have a lot of resources meant for folks interested in the work of climate specifically. And if anyone is interested in the domain of labor and policy, I honestly think there is a huge intersection with public health within that domain. One of the other articles that I had your professor send over actually was a piece I wrote that talked about how garment workers in LA were specifically affected during COVID. Garment workers were suddenly frontline workers, and we had so many instances of major COVID outbreaks within factories. And so I think there's a huge touch point there that can be looked at. But these are some amazing organizations that are doing the work if anyone is interested. There's the Garment Workers Center in LA. There's Remake Our World, which is an amazing advocacy org based out of San Francisco, but they have a global network that anyone can join. And they're doing a lot of critical work around issues of garment workers around the world. The Fabric Act is a really interesting piece of legislation. It is the Garment Worker Protection Act, which was specific to California, gone to a federal level. So I know I've written California there, but they're trying to kind of make it a nationwide thing. There's also the Fashion Act coming out of New York, which has a lot that underpins it, but I won't get into that in this presentation. If anyone is interested in following the work or staying in touch, my Instagram and website are on this last slide, and there's a contact form there if you had any questions. But with that said, I think we could go into Q&A.
Aditi, thank you for your talk. We've had 3 amazing talks and very complimentary talks. So we have a few minutes for QA. Feel free to ask questions of any of our speakers. Jenna, please go right ahead.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for your amazing talk. I was wondering, in what ways can technology and possibly innovation drive sustainability in fashion, and if there are any notable breakthroughs that you can share regarding this topic?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different domains. I think, Amanda, I wasn't here for your talk, but I know you can probably speak to this. I guess I could speak from the consumer end. I have a friend who's actually a Berkeley graduate who has created an amazing resource called Beaker. I'll leave it in the chat. But they're basically using tools around data scraping to kind of bring together a lot of data around what brands are or aren't doing from a social to environmental level to just give the consumers a bit more clarity on sustainability specs without going into an 80-page sustainability report, which in practice, like I'm so glad those sustainability reports exist, but I think we need more accessible touch points. So I think that's one example of maybe streamlining transparency within the fashion industry and how that interacts with consumer behavior. But I will pause there because I think, Amanda, you might be better suited for this question.
Yeah, I mean, when you say technology, that's a huge question on multiple different sides. But I think I do want to point out one thing, which is the idea of the Luddite fallacy, if you're not familiar with this. So the Ludditism is this idea of kind of being anti-technology, and it was born kind of in the Industrial Revolution, where it was actually against sewing machines as this very high level of technology, which was, eliminating people's jobs. And I think the point of what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of innovation in technological systems and science, et cetera, that can move the fashion industry towards better social and human practices. It's about changing jobs, not, you might be getting rid of certain jobs, but you're trying to create jobs in other places. So there's a government and infrastructure question there. So it's about really, that has to work hand in hand. And, thinking back, I just like to to think about that as like, the Jacquard loom, which was arguably the first computer, was actually a fashion and textile innovation. Then we have Ludditism, which was like hitting against, we're getting rid of like hand stitching. So fashion has always been at the center of this kind of debate. And I think it's about this reconciling of, understanding all the systems around the technology that you're trying to put in place and how it affects the human part, how it affects the environment part. And I think about encouraging like these small technological innovations, like a friend of mine who runs an organization called Farm. He's based in Amazon. He's Brazilian, but he worked in New York in strategy. And he works with kind of local farmers and has invented some very small like technological tools around how to speed up the picking of the cotton. It's still their organic farms. And so this high-low blending to me is one of those encouraging places. Same thing that we did with the nettle, the Himalayan nettle collective, right? That still needs to be collected by humans, but the innovative part is on how we can process it downstream to make it more useful in various forms of technology. So I like to think about, using humans for what they do well and what we need them for and what technology hasn't solved, and then getting rid of the jobs or transforming the jobs that are abusive by nature and lend themselves to robotics. So.
Just to maybe build on that, I think, yeah, there's a lot being done right now in terms of creating market access for a lot of those artisans that I've mentioned that are creating beautiful pieces, but maybe don't have, again, market access. So that's one domain I've also seen. And then I've lost my train of thought on the other piece. So I'll leave it there.
June, yes, please, June.
Yeah, I really think that there is room for both. So I agree with Amanda and I agree with Adita. Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Yeah. A friend of mine who's a programmer worked for Dearborn, and he came up with a system where using cameras and computer vision, he basically, when there's a weed in the cotton field, then they spray the pesticides. So in the past, a human being would do it. But once we wanted things to be done quickly, the spray of pesticides would just be continuous, which has trade-offs like cancer, high birth defects. So there are technological solutions to say, hey, we don't need to do that anymore because we now have artificial intelligence and a camera that knows when to spray pesticides and when not to. So technology is not the enemy. It can solve a lot of these problems. However, I think that there are places that don't have access to all this technology. So what can they do with what they have? And I think people showing that level of creativity and resistance and resilience to say, well, I can make something and make money. So I think there's room for both.
Yeah, I know we have other questions, but as someone who works a lot in the craft domain, I never want to create this assumption that I'm anti technology or anything like that. I think there is a domain of discredited ways of knowing, but also making sure we're not pushing a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to technology and things like that. So yeah, I think these are all really valuable things that have been said, but I know there's some other questions as well.
Yeah, let's go on to some questions. And I know it may be too much to ask, but if you may stay just a few minutes after the end of the class, so that maybe we can get a couple more questions. Janet, please.
Hi, yeah, thank you for that like amazing conversation and like presentation. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, but I'm just wondering, how does your company engage? Like, how do you get your consumers to like engage to raise awareness about like the sustainable fashion practices and like to encourage more responsible purchase decisions? Like, how do you, yeah, how do you engage? How do you get people to like grasp the idea that it's
Yes. Is this a question for me?
I think it may
Yes.
be for Amanda. Oh, sorry. Go
Oh,
ahead.
no, I think it was for Aditi. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have a clothing brand of my own. My role in the industry is more so partnering with brands and creating stories, whether that's journalistically or on social media. But in terms of, kind of inspiring that change within the consumer base, I would say when we think about what has kind of encouraged why we buy what we do, it's been very aesthetics led, or this idea of like, you need this, because it's the dress of the trend of the season. And so what I always like to do is kind of, we could start from a place of aesthetics, but maybe talk about the story behind who made this garment, through what artistic practice, through what craft practice, what is the importance of that to a certain culture. I do a lot of content around the importance of identifying one's own personal style, so we aren't just being influenced by this constant trend cycle that's always changing. So I would say, like, on social media, you could kind of see some of the discourse that I'm engaging with. But I think when you think about fast fashion, one of the major tools on why it has grown so much has been social media and this idea of people constantly pushing us to buy. So I'm always trying to subvert that medium to talk about education and other topics that I think are important that I've mentioned in this chat.
Amanda, maybe you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on board with that answer. It's really about, educating yourself and just setting your own priorities and value system. I mean, I think this is just true across every industry. There's so much information out there. There's so much stuff that's fake. And who do you trust? How can you find that? Read, reliable media. What are the brands saying directly? Like going down, I think it's, to me, that's always about the game of telephone is the most dangerous part, where there's like somebody saying something about something that isn't actually an expert, and how everything is getting skewed. So, go to the direct reports, if you're interested, right? And I think, oh, sorry. Yeah. So I think that's where I would just say, like, dig in there beyond the first level of TikTok. With people like Aditi, like, that what she recommends. Find the places you trust. And I can post some after this. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, so 2 more questions. Yona, please.
Hi. So my question is, I think for the fashion field, there is a huge problem, which you both mentioned, is like people care more about the style that others are wearing, and usually the more expensive brand, they can use a better material which can also be sustainable, while most of the brand, like, they have to lower their budget, so they would use a cheaper material which are usually not sustainable, while most people can only afford the cheaper brand. So is there any way you think could change that?
Yeah, I'll take this one for sure, because it's something that I care deeply about. And this is really when I talk about the behavioral change and the kind of business model change. So, like, something like Rent the Runway has totally changed my fashion, kind of behavior. Like, I was a member, like, when it started, like, 8 years ago, and you're exactly right, where you can experience higher quality brands with better materials generally, although I wouldn't say that 100% a more expensive brand means better materials, but that's another issue. But this idea that you can mix up different models and that, you know, what we get from fast fashion is this kind of love for change and personal expression, and that's why people love the fashion industry, or, you know, some people do. So what are other ways that you can satisfy that? So things like rental, things like resale, like Poshmark, you know, all those kinds of platforms where you can, you know, you have secondary markets, vintage, secondhand, that's huge. I mean, especially with your generation, I know my niece, like, who's 14, she like barely buys anything new. And then identify those few items that you do think are quality that you know, we have like these really great stories of teenagers kind of saving up to get a Pengai hoodie, and you know, then it becomes really special. So when the clothing has a story behind it and they're kind of proud to wear it, there's a different part of fashion that's about, you know, personal expression and identity and community that that can be, you know, extend beyond consumerism. And that's one of the beautiful things about digital platforms, and even like, for example, like the metaverse. This is going to sound really strange, but, you know, outfit of the day, right? You can have, you know, basically your metaverse digital outfit that changes every minute if you want, that costs, well, almost no carbon footprint. But this idea that we can move towards different platforms and different kinds of identities that are not just about mass consumption.
Perfect. And one more question, and Chika.
Hi, yeah, thank you for your presentation. I was really interested in what you discussed about Coachtopia and sort of the circular model of kind of taking back waste pieces and redesigning to make use of sort of what we create throughout the process. I was just wondering, you also mentioned that it's not a perfect system, like it's slower and harder to scale. So given those logistical challenges, like how implementable do we think this is like in the future in the fashion industry, like among some of the bigger players that we see? And also if there's a way to incentivize adoption of models like these, so that we can see more players in the industry taking it on.
Yeah, that's a really great question. What was interesting about Coachtopia is so many of the techniques that they were employing in practice were upcycling techniques that we've seen within these cultures, especially in small scale production. I think Jung, you mentioned in your presentation as well. So with Coachtopia, it was a matter of streamlining those in a larger context where you have to meet certain sales metrics or have a certain amount of like pieces with each colorway. And so I think that's where the tensions kind of exist. In terms of your question, what's interesting about Coachtopia from an internal perspective is the reason it's a sub-brand is to kind of create the case to a legacy brand that there is value in this, to kind of see what consumer behavior is going to look like around upcycled pieces like this. And the hope is Coachtopia doesn't remain a sub-brand, but actually those practices are ingested back into the larger Coach, you know, framework. And I think that's why there is so many conversations around making this cool for the current generations. But Amanda, I'm not sure if you had any perspectives on that tension of, you know, viability from a sales and economic perspective. I think we are able to understand it's important from a sustainability perspective, but it's just a matter of understanding what that means from price points and consumer behavior as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it also speaks to what, I mean, I agree with you, but, you know, what was brought up earlier is around that, you know, sustainable solutions are only as good as there is basically a profit model, and that doesn't have to be evil. It's just that this is the way, like it cannot be a charity. We have to change systems so that they can actually be sustainable, economically sustainable, you know, to exist and to last and to change the status quo. And so when you have, you know, alternative forms of income, which is that's kind of how I imagine Coachtopia, is like this kind of this experiment in a transformation of a system, which allows you to kind of bring in alternative forms of income into the brand and then transition over into these better practices while, you know, maintaining the business.
Yeah, and I would say what's another interesting domain For coaches, they have like a reloved workshop. So they're encouraging folks to bring in pieces to be repaired rather than disposing of it and buying new. So another dimension of this conversation is, yeah, not necessarily buying new every time, but allowing brands to have a business model that's about repair and longevity, which is really
Yeah, and there's even like a new kind of surge around like tailors. Like I know local in New York City, like, you know, those the little kiosks in the subway that repair shoes, they're so like valued, and how do we actually create a network around protecting those and actually making them like more affordable? Because sometimes we're in a stage where it's like more affordable to buy a new pair of shoes than to fix them, which is just kind of really horrible. And so how do we you know, create kind of systems where they don't have to be as expensive, or they, you know, there's a business model that works, that if it, like, say it gets incorporated into a department store, and that's like another service that you can have, or even have like a subscription service to repair things, right? There's these new kind of ways to explore what that means.
Yeah. And you know, brings two thoughts to my mind. One is cultural. I'm from Mexico, and the idea of not repairing something would horrify most people. You know, here, try to repair a blender, and basically you have to buy a new one. In Mexico, there's 30 places near you that are more than happy to do it with old repurposed parts. And the second thing is, some of the models you're mentioning are actually returned to an old model. You know, old brands like Barber and Mephisto, etc., have been doing that as part of their work. You know, Barber, you send your garments. This is for 60 years. They've been doing this, and they will return them almost brand new. So, but with that, listen, thank you so much for staying a little bit longer. We really have never done this before, staying after, but this was such a fascinating conversation. Thank you to all three of you. Unfortunately, Jung had some technical problems, but I hope we will be able to see you in future years here. If you know, give us some updates. But thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Nice to meet everybody. Yeah. Good luck with your
Bye,
projects.
everybody.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye, Gary. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Bye.